Hi, this is Javier Barros. This is a video about our presentation at the recent Congress of the Hispanic section of the International Seminar on Urban Forum held in Barcelona. As the article content was related to current COVID-19 pandemic, this presentation covers in some cases contents corresponding to more recent developments. The article is part of a wider research on the use of open data in urban analysis. It has been prepared during the COVID lockdown. In Spain, as elsewhere, lockdown has made urban density part of the citizen conversation. This is a clear change from business as usual, where density was hardly mentioned outside specialized circles. This work has focused on measuring urban density in various ways in the city of Madrid using three approaches. Weight density on the whole municipality by census blocks, density on each urban block, and the building scale in the Salamanca ward. Open data comes from the National Cadastre, National Statistics, and the Madrid municipality. According to personal experience here in Spain and Europe, and to foreign media, COVID has taken everyone by surprise. During the initial moments, differences have been small regardless of the color of the government, as the mess has been consistent everywhere. Density has been blamed for the seriousness of the pandemic in cities as Madrid, Paris, or New York, but there is a problem with density. It is far from being a concept with a single definition. The lockdown has raised many primal fears, and some voices have even wondered whether big cities would lose their appeal. To this day, this seems a far-fetched prediction. The world is getting aware of the way in which living conditions relate to health. This is not without similarities to the way in which the hygienist movement at the turn of the 20th century looked at the city. Back then, the arrival of large numbers of rurals to overcrowded slums in growing cities provoked tuberculosis epidemics. The studies of César Chicote in Madrid, the work about the îlot insalubre in Paris, or the writings of John Ruskin in Manhattan about the laboring population show that there was an awareness of the link between urban density and the way health issues developed. The scientific work on the COVID crisis is starting to produce results on the correlation between density and disease, which is not always direct. Work in progress often shows signs that other factors have to be considered. Anyway, the persistence of the pandemic makes all these conclusions still provisional. The analysis of the case in Madrid focuses on three scales which approach to build reality. As Madrid has evolved over the last century, these scales show how some places have been left behind and have areas in dire need of improvement. This happens as well in areas perceived as socially vulnerable as intensive neighborhoods, but revenue implies differences in the seriousness of the problem. The first analysis concerns weighted urban footprint, defined as to obtain a measure that can be compared across cities. The usual problem when talking about density is that generally it is calculated by using as a denominator an administrative or census boundary, which can produce a distorted vision. Would you count water when measuring New York City density? If you have chosen to see this presentation in English, chances are you have a limited knowledge about the city of Madrid. This map shows the footprint of the buildings in the Madrid region as rendered by the current cadastral data. The Spanish capital is the second most populous in the European Union, with 3.2 million residents. It is the center of the third largest metro area in the Union, with slightly over 6.6 million. The north of the municipality is occupied by a forest, so population is quite scarce, and so happens also with buildings. The southwest is also scarcely occupied until now, but urban planning has defined most of it as expansion areas. It is clearly a city in which density, as defined by the political boundary, gives a biased figure. In the 1960s, the city had about 85% of the total regional population. By now, Madrid municipality houses just about half the regional population. The historical urban core, which you can see outlined here, was quite limited in extension, but is still a vibrant area. As you can see in blue, there has been a relevant building surge since 2001. It lasted until the advent of the 2008 crisis, which hit Spain quite hardly. And now let's get back to our analysis methodology. Our first approach aims at defining an homogeneous denominator for density calculations. When you define a two-step buffer operation, you generate areas that consider proximity between buildings but also take into account urban voids. As you intersect these geometries with census blocks, you obtain weighted urban footprints. This can be further refined when you take into account only the footprint of those buildings whose main use is residential. On the left, you can see the residential footprint, marked A, and the rest of the urban footprint, B, over the central area of the city. Two-thirds of the overall footprint is residential, not far from the proportion of the floor areas for residential and other uses in large Spanish cities. The map on the right shows the residential density in households per hectare as calculated over the intersection of census blocks and residential footprint. Areas with higher household density are either older or poorer. On the other side, it is clear that the historical core is not as dense as areas around it, due to the presence of business, or in some areas of Salamanca, due to the combination of that with very large homes in some areas, as we will see. In the analysis by urban blocks, the main aim has been to identify built elements that can aggravate or ease the lockdown as a weeks-long experience. As a result of the fact that over 80% of the housing units in the city are multifamily, balconies have been of great help. Conversely, those housing units without proper sunlight have provoked more suffering. To this day, cadastral open data is not enough to identify those elements that help cope with lockdown. There is no consistent registry of the units that have balconies, rooftop private areas, or such spaces. The aggravating factors are clearer. According to cadastral data, in Madrid about 1.5% of the housing units are interior, as they have no access to direct sunlight through streets. Less than 5% of the housing units are under 38 square meters, the minimum planning standard, and about 0.7% are under 25 square meters, the minimum threshold planning, when a living room, a kitchen, and a sleeping room are grouped in a single space. On the left, you can see the number of housing units that are registered on each urban block. Those blocks with higher numbers are distributed around the city, but the south central area has a large share. On the right, you can see for each block how many interior housing units there are. There are some coincidences with the left image. The image on the left shows the concentration of housing units under 38 square meters per urban block, mainly on the south central areas. The right image shows, taking into account the weighted urban footprint by census block, the average floor area per person in buildings with residential as the main use. It is clear that coincidences are limited, as in some areas with many small dwellings, the overall space by resident can be quite high. In mid-September, the Madrid regional government decided to impose movement restrictions in some areas to stop the spread of COVID. Most of those areas, which you can see on a press clip on the left, are coincident with small floor area per person ratios, which points to overcrowding issues. At the world scale, Salamanca is quite interesting. It has high revenue areas, but also one of the most densely built tissues in the city. Despite that, its COVID data is not among the highest in the city. The study has taken into account the true distribution of uses and spatial configurations according to cadastral open data. The real estate includes floor area sketches by level of the cadastre provide quite informative elements. In upper floors, according to that, just 76% of the floor area correspond to homes with views to the street. These were larger units, so there were just 65% of the overall number of buildings in the sample area. The plan shows that the harder situation in a lockdown, taking into account that most of the buildings are over 7 stories, are the red marked units. These are lit and ventilated only through quite small courtyards. So in fact, these are quite posh areas, but sometimes they can also be, despite extreme real estate values, hard to live in. As a conclusion, open data allows to detect areas in which objective conditions can harm the quality of life in normal times, and even more in lockdown. The dynamics of urban transformation through the last century have not prevented the persistence of such buildings. Unfortunately, this data won't allow to measure factors that can make life easier during such an enduring experience as the lockdown. Overall, density is a complex matter whose meaning requires proper measures. Thank you for your attention.